open up that Crystal Pepsi and get comfortable.
This is Dope Nostalgia.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dope Nostalgia. I'm your host, Naomi. We have another special interview for you today, and I'm still astounded that, we're getting these amazing interviews with people who had huge hits in the 90s and having a great time putting the show together for you. So today's special guest is from a group called Harvey Danger. They had a huge hit in the 90s called Flagpole Sitter, and the lead singer, Sean Nelson, joins me today to talk about the band and what he's up to now. Here's a little background information on Harvey Danger.
Wikipedia moment.
Please bear in mind that Wikipedia is not to be taken as actual 100% fact. Any donkey could edit it at any time. If I'm reading you the artist's bio, that stuff is the real truth.
Harvey Danger was an American alternative rock band. It was formed in 1992 in Seattle, Washington by Aaron Huffman and Jeff J. Lynn, who were both journalism students at the University of Washington. Drummer Evan Salt and singer Sean Nelson were brought into the band in 1993, solidifying the band's lineup for the remainder of their initial existence. After performing a variety of shows in the local area and recording a number of demos with producer John Goodmanson, Harvey Danger released their debut album, Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone, in 1997 through the Arena Rock Recording Company. Although the album was not a success initially, its second track, Flagpole Sitta, began receiving nationwide radio airplay, and soon after the band signed with Slash Records, a subsidiary of the major label London Recordings. Slash London reissued Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone and Flagpole Sitta as a single in April 1998 to widespread commercial success, with the album eventually becoming certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America in 1999. However, the band grew increasingly uncomfortable with their association with Flagpole Sitta and their perceived status as a one-hit wonder, and sought to distance themselves from the song and their early lo-fi sound with their subsequent musical output. Following a series of corporate restructurings that saw the band change record labels, Harvey Danger issued their second studio album, King James Version, in 2000, which showed the band moving in a more artistic direction influenced by the works of Radiohead and Frederick Tutton. Although its sole single, Sad Sweetheart of the Rodeo, became a minor hit, the album didn't perform as well commercially, and its failure led to the band breaking up in April 2001. But it has since attracted a cult following. Nelson, Huffman, and Lynn reformed Harvey Danger in April 2004, with Michael Welke replacing Salt on drums. In 2005, the band issued their third and final album, Little by Little, which featured a more piano-driven sound. The band's decision to release the album as a free BitTorrent download through their website attracted significant attention and helped renew the band's popularity. On May 28, 2009, Harvey Danger announced that they had amicably decided to disband, and the band played its final show at the Crocodile Cafe in Seattle on August 29, 2009. Such an interesting history that I wanted to get straight from the source what actually happened. So thank goodness we're going to talk to the lead singer of Harvey Danger today, Sean Nelson. Welcome to Dope Nostalgia. Sean Nelson, welcome.
Thank you.
You're based out of Nashville nowadays, right?
Yes, I've been back living here for about 5 years after having spent a bunch of my life in Seattle. But my folks moved here when I was a teenager, and so I came back because both my mother and stepfather were ailing, and so they asked if I would come back and help take care of them, and I did.
Oh, well, I'm glad you could be there for them. And what's it like in Nashville? Do you enjoy it? Like the music, the culture?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of music happening here and I enjoy a lot of it. it's a very different musical culture than what I'm accustomed to.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's different from what I knew in Seattle. It's much more professional here, and that's because many of the greatest, most skilled, players are here because it's one of the last places in the world where you can actually make a nice living just by being really good at your instrument. But that's really different from the culture that I was used to, which was much more of a kind of, I would hesitate to say like a collectivist utopia, but
Mm.
Seattle, as I knew it, was much more like, hey, we're gonna get together and play some music. You want to come? And it's in someone's basement or a storage space or something. I would hesitate to call Seattle a collectivist utopia, but the vibe was much more like, hey, some friends were getting together to play music. Do you want to come? And it's in my basement. And, everybody shares a, 12-pack of beer or something. But in Nashville, it's much more like, hey, we're going to play some music. Do you want to come? And then you get an invoice. But
Oh.
that's just the nature of the way it works.
Yeah.
And those people are, making their living from doing it. So it makes sense. It's just different.
It's a good thing, I think. I mean, less of a grind, would you say, that it would be trying to make it out of any other city?
I guess it depends on what you mean by make it, like
Yeah.
it's much more industry centric, I'll say that. And since the music
There.
industry is very beleaguered, that sort of necessarily dictates what the vibe and attitude is like. But for all that, there's still a ton of generosity of spirit. Musicians support each other, and I really admire and appreciate that.
I love that. I'm glad to hear it's been a good time there for you. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, who were your musical influences growing up for yourself?
Growing up, well, as a kid, it was all very much like the sort of 60s and 70s, sort of the boilerplate in a way. Beatles, Stones, Joni Mitchell was huge in my house, and Simon and Garfunkel as well, I guess. But sort of, like the sort of the smarter end of what you would think of as sort of popular music, maybe. And then as I came into my own taste in my later teen years and my early 20s, it was very much REM and the Smiths, and then also reaching back to things, the Kinks and the Zombies. And I never let go of the Beatles, but those were all sort of the big ones. And I also had a kind of fascination with the Monkees from a very early age. And that has never dimmed either.
Yeah. No, I don't know much about the Monkees. It's funny because I know quite a bit about boy bands in general. I would rather consider them an actual band because of the instruments.
Right.
So,
well, I know that's an issue for a lot of people, and it's valid to a degree, but it's basically what was interesting about them is sort of the way it was a much larger collaborative project with a bunch of different people coming in and writing and playing, and how that all kind of developed was very more sort of culturally influential than maybe musically.
Yeah. Just like, but the way they were presented in some ways seems, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know much about them to say this for a fact, but it seemed more manufactured, the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, it was in fact pretty manufactured at the beginning, but you could in fact say the same thing about the Clash or the Sex Pistols or any number of bands that were put together at the outset, who kind of developed their own identities, and the band sort of became a band even though they were hired as actors, which that whole transformation I find totally fascinating.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, it doesn't really matter how you come together. It's what you create out of it that matters.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Now, speaking of coming together, when Harvey Danger came together, from what I understand, you were all schoolmates and worked on the newspaper together. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, we were just in college, and I guess probably some of us had some desire to find our way as journalists or whatever, thinking ahead to when we had, when we would have to have careers. But really, it was just more like we all had an interest in doing that, and we happened to meet. But really, what was captivating all of us was the music that was going on. And the thing that was distinctive about us, at least in my mind, was that none of us had ever been in bands before. Like we had all sort of been like peering over the fence at what we thought of as, rock and roll life. But we didn't feel like it was something that we could it wouldn't even have occurred to most of us to even do it. But around that time, thanks largely to Nirvana and some of the more sort of some of the cultural influence that they had, was very much a time when the idea that anyone could do it was taking hold. And so, our guitarist and bass player, Jeff and Aaron, went together to a music store, bought their first guitar and bass and tiny practice amps together, and then went back to their apartment and learned how to play by playing together. So it was all very much like this was our first little, it was in many ways like our own little treehouse, more than a kind of band that was on the make in any way. It was really an art project before it was anything else.
That's fascinating. And then I'm imagining when it comes to songwriting and crafting that you've got a heavy dose of lyricist there.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
well, that was
so
always my department.
Oh, perfect. And then, so the actual music part of writing, was that collaborative or?
Yeah, we had a really weird process that was really just to do with how we learned to be a band together, which was by playing together. And that's how the writing happened. We did everything, like everything really was the four of us trying to learn some sort of, in some ways it was just trying to learn how to communicate musically, as much as trying to be ambitious about writing a song or whatever, because none of us had ever written a song before. There are a bunch of ways to do it. The way we did it was pretty counterintuitive. As I have gone on through, and continued to make music and worked with a lot of other people, I've never met anyone who does it the way we did it. And there are lots of good reasons for that. Because it's inefficient, but it also is what makes our sound kind of distinctive, I think, and just different from the way most bands. It's different from the way most bands work, but it's also we sound different from the way most bands sound, and that's the sort of like, it's for good and ill, but it's who we were.
Yeah, there's no wrong way to write a song, but I can see what you mean.
I think that's true. But there are wrong ways to try and write a lot of songs, and ours was one of them, I think. But in the end, I'm very proud of what we wound up making. In I think every case, there are some songs of ours that I like much more than I like others, but we never would have come up with any of it had it just been one person having to have having to kind of be in charge of everything.
Yeah, no, and the collaborativeness, I always find that to be a positive thing. Going into my next question, actually, I like to highlight songs that were loved by the artists themselves, not necessarily the radio hits. I always like to share a deep cut when I can. So I'd like to know about your favorite tracks on the album, Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone?
I think that the leadoff song, Carlotta Valdez, was really it's really good. It's really exciting, and also sort of it's idiosyncratic because the lyrics are, I had gone to see a screening of the Alfred Hitchcock film Vertigo, which had been re-released in whatever, I think 96 or 97. It was an anniversary and it had been restored, and I went and saw it. I'd seen it before, but it kind of didn't make as big an impression before I had seen it on the big screen. And I just, I had all these very vivid impressions of the film, and it so happened that, someone had come up with a bit of that song, and we got together and started really working it out, and the lyrics just came right out. And it's basically it's not a synopsis of the film, but it's sort of in the voice of the main character of the film, kind of. I also think that even though there are very direct, there's a very direct link between that, like the riff of that song. The verses are very REM-ish, and then the chorus is very Kinksy, and like I can really hear exactly what we were listening to right at that time. But it also feels very much like us, and so that's a good one. That's one I always am very happy to hear from that record. And then the other one is probably God. I think that record is pretty solid from top to bottom, given that it was the first thing we ever finished. But I also think that the song "Wrecking Ball," which is I think second to last maybe on it, it's the most uncharacteristic thing on there. It's very quiet and pretty, and it has a nice violin bit in the middle. And the lyrics are pretty intimate, about family dynamics in a way that I think was maybe a stretch for me at that time. Not that I wasn't thinking about it, but just like writing about it was, I had to dig a little deeper for that. And I think it sounds very accomplished given that so much of what we were doing was so boisterous and loud guitars and everything, and that one's very restrained and kind of lovely, I think.
Tear down the bearing wall, put up a picture window, something to look through at the bastard colors, burnt sienna, put down the wrecking ball. Who has a friend who needs one? I've got a way to get to work in almost any city, doesn't matter where. Take a needle, I won't be there. Privileges forsaken there. Liberties I've taken take me nowhere. Put down the wrecking ball. Don't let a childhood linger. They'll take the world apart and break my baby brother's finger so he can't shake my hand. Guard the dead against my legacy and lack the wound no more. Run from nowhere, nowhere follows you.
Now, being from Seattle and making music, getting together initially during the time of the grunge explosion, How heavily influenced were you by it, or did you find it more of a hindrance to what you were trying to accomplish?
I mean, the truth of the matter is that we started playing together in 93 and I guess late 92, no, around 93. But like the the heyday of that sound was over, at least in as far as Seattle was concerned. In the rest of the world, it was still kind of on the rise, maybe, but the kind of the to be in Seattle at that time, was to hear a lot of people who had lived there all their lives talking about how how the world had missed the actual glory days. But our thing really, we didn't sound like any of those bands, but we loved most of them, I would say. I mean, we were for sure all not only big fans of Nirvana, but really are in some way that band and that record, Nevermind, had like demonstrably affected the course of each of our lives in different ways, or in some ways changed the course of our lives. But it just affected all of us in really profound ways. And there's no way probably we would have even considered starting a band had it not been for that influence. But again, you wouldn't, if you listen to our record side by side with any of their records, even Bleach, you wouldn't be like, oh, right, that's an obvious through line. But like, I loved Soundgarden, still love them. Mudhoney was a huge influence on us. Not, again, we didn't sound like them, but the way they were was so inspiring and so good. And so like, just sort of, there was a kind of, I mean, because I lived in Seattle all that time, I am professionally forbidden to use the word grunge, but because you're not allowed to use it. But like, if that word applies to any band, it would have been Mudhoney. But there's a rawness and a dirtiness and also a sense of humor to them that really did affect all of our understandings of what rock and roll music ought to be. And so, I mean, I would say of the big bands that came out, those were the three that we were really kind of attuned to. There were other bands that were as big or bigger than those others that, we either liked or didn't like or had, I don't think that any of us had a huge connection to any of them, but that music was inescapable. And so it felt, it felt great to be in the shadow of that whole lineage. But, Nirvana was the big one. And I think they stand, even now, and maybe especially now, they stand pretty dramatically apart from the rest of that explosion. Creatively, sonically, musically, all that stuff. But it's somewhat significant that we played our first show ever on, I think it was April 6th, 1994, and I remember thinking, God, we played at this club that's no longer there, not a club, a bar called the Lake Union Pub. It was really pretty grotty. But I remember thinking, like that this was somehow the first little step on the way of being in some way connected to a Seattle lineage, and it was exciting for that reason. And then it turns out, of course, that Kurt Cobain had killed himself just before that day, but the news didn't break until a couple of days later.
Oh, wow.
And so it's kind of an interesting little footnote moment historically.
No kidding.
For me. But yeah, I mean, it could never have been a hindrance, especially in the sense that once we became, maybe a little bit more ambitious about being heard by more people. It was, obviously the mid to late 90s. It's not as though anybody had forgotten about Seattle. It was still, a sort of a dominant touchstone in the culture, even though I think popular music had moved on quite a bit. But when we went out on our first tours in 1998, once we were pretty pretty well exposed because of Flagpole Sitta being a hit. Every time we did an interview, someone would ask us about Seattle music, what it was like, if we were grunge. Like that line of inquiry was very fresh still, which was funny because it had seemed like old news to all of us.
Yeah. And like, even though it came and went in such a quick period of time, I feel like the lasting impression of grunge has stuck around. It's something we still talk about. And I think one of the reasons it was so huge and effective is this was the first thing of its kind. Now we have like cycles, right? We have pop cycles once in a while and, those kinds of things. But I don't think grunge ever did that.
No, it was in a way kind of the last moment where a sound came out that had never been anywhere near certainly the charts. It had never been commercial. It had been around, obviously, like, the Stooges' first album came out in 68, something like that, late 60s, early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
The music and the musical influences that gave rise to it were familiar enough, but they were always a little underground. And I mean, Nirvana also had a great punk lineage and also an interesting kind of new wave and pop sensibility, pop in the Beatles sense, not pop in the Britney Spears sense, but that music was known to people who cared about music, but it wasn't something that you would hear, at the grocery store or something.
Exactly.
But I think that Seattle moment was the last time that happened where it was a new, or at least a novel thing for mainstream music. And everything that has happened since has been some kind of either revival or return or whatever. But like, there's been nothing to compare to it as a kind of national and even international sort of sensation, because also all these other cultural factors came into play just after it, like Napster and the internet at large, and the sort of the collapse of the music industry made it so that there was no kind of huge, all those things came together to make it so that there is no mass audience anymore.
More of like this big melting pot.
Well, I think it's more like a bunch of different factions, and then everybody a huge number of people come together for things that are just sort of that are made to appeal to the greatest number of people that they can, which is a little bit different from what I think of as I guess that used to be how rock and roll functioned, but rock and roll feels like a pretty dusty artifact in the culture. It doesn't have the same sense of excitement or immediacy that it used to, because people have moved on and different sounds have become dominant. I think that's fine. It's just rock and roll is still kind of the magnetic north for me.
Yeah,
but that's because I'm 100 years old.
No, and I don't like the fact that the only real rock out there now is considered called classic rock, because of the fact that it's just not in popular culture anymore, in a way that I find sad,
Yeah, sometimes I'm saddened by it, but I have to say that there's something about it that I think is kind of fine and in a way maybe even good, only in the sense that the idea that it was a mass art form, which it was for a long time. I mean, really from the very early 60s to the end of the 90s, I would say, and maybe a little trickling out into the first decade of the 2000s with all those kind of revival acts, like the Strokes or whatever. But it's an anomaly that it ever was exciting to such a huge number of people, because there are idiosyncrasies in the best rock and roll music, and yes, it can unite people, and it still can, but it's all a question of how many people equals a big audience. And I recently went to an amazing rock show that was in front of 20,000 people, and that seemed like a lot of people to me. And I mean, I've played to audiences that size and larger, And I've also played to audiences of way, way, way less. And it's still, it just feels like whatever is in the room, whatever, like however many people are interested, it can still constitute a community.
What was the
And
show?
that's really important. I went to see U2 play at the Sphere in Las Vegas.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I've seen all kinds of photos of the Sphere, but
It
I'm
was
excited to see it one day.
one of the most incredible spectacles I have ever witnessed. It was really, really amazing. And I've gone back and forth on U2 100 times in my life, but they were triumphant. It was a great show. Good.
All right. What's one of your most memorable performances? You did mention the earlier one, the first one that you guys had done, but is there another one that comes to mind as standing out for you?
I remember a lot of, there was a period right when we started playing regularly. I mean, the shows that we were playing when we were playing in front of larger audiences, a lot of those were, fun and good in different ways. Some of them were disastrous. And I remember a lot of them, but they do sort of blur together in a way. I can tell you one that was from after we broke up and then got back together, and we were touring behind our third record. And, when we got the band back together, it was very much like, is anybody going to care? Does anyone remember about all that stuff? And, a lot of people did. And there was not a mass audience once again, but like a devout cult of people who really liked not just the one song of ours, but our records and cared about it. And we were playing in Chicago at a club called Shuba's, which is pretty small. It holds, I think, maybe 300 or 400 people, but it was, was commandingly sold out or whatever. I think we did two nights, maybe three. I can't remember, but I do remember that I had laryngitis. I had sung myself out on the tour. It was like 2006. And I was standing up there basically, like wheezing out the words like, I'm so sorry. I don't know if I can sing, but like we're going to try. And and they started playing, the band started playing the song Woolly Muffler from our first record. And I started trying to sing and it was really a struggle. And then I noticed that the entire audience was singing every word of the intro part, which is over some quiet guitar. And I just stopped singing and listened. And it was like a trust fall at camp or something. I leaned back into that audience kind of doing my part for me, and I felt so connected to all of those people and so grateful that they not only were singing, which is a great thing people do, which knows or whatever, but like they were singing for me and to me, but also to themselves, and they really knew it, and they really like there was I can't think of a time when a lot of people talk about the connection between the performer and the crowd, and I've that's something I care about and believe in, but I had never experienced it to that extent before in such a powerful, emotional way. And of course, by the time the song kicked into the loud part, I was in tears.
Wow.
Good tears.
Mm-hmm. That would just fill you. Yeah. Like your heart.
It was powerful, very powerful. Because, the nature of our, what I will sort of laughingly call our career, which was, we had one, I guess. But, the nature of our whole thing was that a lot of people heard one song. And we had the very classic version of that one hit experience. Mm-hmm. But being exposed to so many people means that some percentage of those people actually would become connected to and invested in the rest of what we did too. And of course, that was always the more meaningful aspect. And to feel it in action, it's an album track. I'm sure it was never once played on any radio station anywhere. The song I like, and we all liked it, but it wasn't none of us thought of it as like our masterwork or anything, but to know that all these people not only singing the chorus, but singing all the words in the verse, it's very wordy. That that was a powerful demonstration of the thing that I think a lot of musicians and songwriters wonder about, which is, do people really know this work that we made, and do they care about it? Does it stay with them? There's no way you could see it any other way at that moment, and I've never ever forgotten it.
Very fulfilling.
That was almost 20 years ago now, so crazy.
Very fulfilling, and to know that the fan bases stay with you and want to know what you're up to next. That's something I think that every musician really does it for.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The whole question of why people do music or performance of art, really of any kind, it's a tricky one, and the way people talk about it in the world, I don't always necessarily believe or agree with. People sometimes talk in very vaunted ways about how they're doing it for the people, or they're for the kids, or for, like, because the world really needs to heal or something like that. When in fact, I think that the reason people do performance-based art of any kind is essentially pretty selfish. And not, I don't mean that in a negative way.
That's not a bad thing. It's an outlet.
It's for you, and you then do it for others, and then you kind of, your experiences align in some way if you're lucky. And that kind of, by that point, that all of our music felt both intensely private and personal to me, but also shared by again, not a massive number of people, but I don't know what a massive number of people, I don't know what the sort of ideal number of people has to be for it to be meaningful, because we have also played shows for 3 people, and they have been great, and we've played in front of 50,000 people, and it sucked, and I felt nothing. So that's just a strange little. I have had one of the weirdest rides through my life in music, and I like it that way.
Your thoughts on the success of Flagpole Sitta, because I've heard that sometimes people come to resent the song that made them big, or they just plain get tired of it. How do you feel about that song this many years later?
Well, I mean, I have been through a bunch of different iterations of feeling things about it.
Yeah.
Now, what I feel is lucky and good, and it's like if we had several hours to really dissect this, I could tell you some stories. But at the time, I hated it. I didn't hate it, but I hated that it was the center of my existence, and that basically my job became singing Flagpole Sitta somewhere between 2 and 5 times every day, and answering lots of questions about what it meant, and having people tell me how they got their tongue pierced because of it or whatever. And, not to suggest that that is something that any like thinking person could ever genuinely complain about, but it was tedious. And it was also not so long after the novelty of having a pretty big hit song kind of wore off and started becoming more just like the daily reality, that I started worrying about what would come next, and if something would come next, because it was very clear the trajectory that we might have been on, and it turns out we were on. But you start thinking about, well, the next thing, and I think that kept me, for sure, but I think all of us, from appreciating the experience as it was happening. However, as years have gone by, I've been very surprised to learn how durable the song has become. It still gets played all the time, and it still turns up in films and TV shows and things that, yes, I know that they're coming, but we approve the request when we approve the request, and then sort of forget about it, and then it turns up and we hear about it from people that they heard it in some show or something, and the it's just part of the it really is part of the landfill of popular culture. I say that
is.
with love, because I
Yeah.
like the landfill of popular culture for the most part. But when I was 24 or whatever, three, when that was happening, I was very concerned with like wanting to not just be known for that one song, because
Yeah.
you feel a little defensive. But now, I mean, to be known at all, to be known for anything, feels nice. Otherwise I would feel pretty anonymous, even though I've done a lot of stuff that I'm proud of and that has, I would judge to be good, or, at least worthy in some way. But I know that outside of my little sphere, it's it's known in the world, and it has opened an enormous number of doors for me, both like socially and also professionally, that without it, it would just be like I would be telling people that I was in a band as I made their coffee or something. And there's like that's the story of most bands. And I'm happy about the fact that there is, at least I don't have to explain why I was in a band to people.
Yeah.
But it's not as though there's no bittersweet component of it. That became especially acute when Aaron, our bass player, died a few years ago, because even though we had stopped all working together, there was always the notion that we might do something again. And then just as we were actually talking about doing a little tour of festivals in England, because a booker had approached me about it, that's when he went in the hospital and he never came out. And that kind of really sewed it up in a certain way and made it a kind of closed system, the experience of the band. And it also made a lot of things feel like, well, that's how it happened, and there's no revising it, and there's no going back. And we were kids, and then we were grown-ups, and then we stopped working together, and now I look back on it with a lot of love and gratitude.
I'm sorry to hear about Aaron. Do you guys, the rest of you, keep in touch in any way? Still
Yeah,
friends?
we all do. But yeah, absolutely. Better friends now, I would say, even though we don't see each other nearly as much. But that we all had a certain amount of, all bands, I think, are all bands have in common that there's a push and pull between the collective identity that where the band needs every person in it to be what it is, but then the individual identities of the people in the band are, those things really push and pull against each other. And that's the story of basically every band. And I think once we had, it was so disorienting, the experience of going from being like a band that had, we had like some people knew about us in Seattle, but outside of Seattle, there was no sign that we existed, to being suddenly everywhere for 3.5 minutes at a time. But everywhere we went, it was our single preceded us. But then as years went by after that, that caused a lot of kind of, I don't know, we were all a little dislocated, and we weren't there for each other the way we ought to have been. And I think the way really great bands tend to be. And it took some time to kind of repair that. We never exactly fell out. There were no dramatic, like, smashing things against walls and storming out. But we just, we all needed a bit of time and space to become grown-ups about it. And we did. And we had that. And I think we really appreciated each other. And we appreciate each other still.
That's the family element.
That's a good feeling. Yeah.
That's the family element of being a band.
Sure.
You need space from each other sometimes to really appreciate each other. Right?
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Dope Nostalgia listeners, I love you and I thank you so much for being a part of this show and its success over the last 2 years. We have what's called Patreon for those who want to support the show financially. For as little as $1 a month, you can become a subscriber and get bonus content, early podcast release, all kinds of cool behind-the-scenes stuff, and more. There's different tiers of membership starting at only $1 a month. And we even have some special merch for you guys who are in it for the long run. So please, join our Patreon. It's at www.patreon.com/dope nostalgia.
Let's Watch Something is a casual movie review podcast starring Anthony
and Jack.
Everyone loves hearing industry professionals talking about their craft.
That's not us.
We're just a couple of movie lovers
Couple of nerds.
talking about movies
So come join us on Let's Watch Something.
with Anthony and Jack. Anchor.fm/LWS.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's watch something.
Let's watch something.
Let's watch something.
Let's watch something.
Ragu introduces Chicken Tonight simmer sauces, and suddenly everybody's saying,
I feel like chicken tonight, like chicken tonight, chicken tonight.
Choose from 4 new sauces. Each one's made with real vegetables and herbs, so you can make dishes like country French chicken and chicken cacciatore. Just brown the chicken, simmer, and serve.
I feel like chicken tonight, like chicken tonight,
New Chicken Tonight simmer sauces from Ragu.
chicken tonight.
One thing that I found really interesting is when you put out your third album, Little by Little.
Yes.
You did something that was pretty much unheard of. You embraced what was happening with the internet and you released the album as a free BitTorrent download. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. And it's still available as that, even though I don't know if anybody still torrents anything. But yeah.
Well, I do.
putting out a record in 2000, whatever that was, 2004 or 5 in there. It was just like you could fight against that or somehow like try and plant your feet and be opposed to it, or you could just admit that that's how people experienced music. It would be like putting out a record now or a book or whatever and just pretending TikTok doesn't exist. You're entitled to do that. And if it doesn't appeal to you aesthetically, it's totally valid. But like you are basically demanding that no one find out that you put out a record. And so rather than, and also, but also the culture had, like the culture wasn't massively interested in bands that had a hit song in the late 90s in 2004 or 5. It's not like it was impossible. Nada Surf definitely had a great second act and they were a huge inspiration and they're good friends. But like we just thought, well, what's the shortest line between us making this record and people hearing it? And it seemed like making it free, because we were never, we had some very good fortune, but we were never primarily concerned with money, much to our chagrin at times, but like we left a lot of money on the table. But in that case, it worked out great. And it gave us a good deal of goodwill, but more than that, it just exposed a lot of people to it. And we had more people bought, downloaded, and or streamed that song or that record, sorry, little by little, in the space of a month than had listened to or bought or knew about our second record, King James version, which cost a lot of money and came out on a major label and had a big expensive video, like all the kind of old line ways of promoting records. Nobody even knew it existed, it seemed, at that time. It has developed a following since then, but it just seemed like if you think about the project of being a professional band differently, we were in a good position because also we had name recognition, which made it newsworthy, I guess, in the in some parts of the media. And then that became a much more kind of Radiohead did the same thing a couple years later with was it In Rainbows, and that of course was a big watershed event in the culture. And I had the opportunity to meet Radiohead. I was backstage at an REM show in Amsterdam in 2008. I think it was on their last tour, and Radiohead was there. And I kind of nervously tiptoed up to Colin Greenwood and asked him if he had even heard of our band or that we had done the same thing with our record. And of course, he had not heard of our band or that we did that. So that was the answer to that question. But, it was still, it felt like a big validation that whole project, because we just did it ourselves because we really wanted to. And it felt good. And it was all, there was a certain kind of, again, like closing the loop on a lot of unresolved feelings and stuff that we had about being a band at all by that point. So it was great.
I'm glad. And that was the last album, wasn't it?
It was. And it also, by the way, P.S., turned out to be profitable to do that way, which was something that we didn't know for sure was going to happen. Not that again was the main goal, but it certainly is nice not to have lost money on a big undertaking like that. But yeah, it was the last thing we did. The last thing technically was a single that we put out about a year later. But yeah, it was that was it.
Wow.
And that was the tour that show in Chicago was for.
Oh, okay. So I guess monetarily, it's probably the thing that gets people coming to the shows. It's the thing that gets it's the commercial. The music is almost like the commercial to entice you to the band. It became that way. It was not that way when we put out our first record, because like touring was considered to be sort of a loss leader, that you would, do a lot of shows and keep, but the goal commercially was to get people buying the record, because that's certainly where the label made its money. And for a while we weren't even permitted to sell our own records at our own shows because it would interfere with the SoundScan numbers, supposedly. But but that was also at a time when we were selling like 30,000 records a week or whatever. So insane numbers for a band that, that first record we made for $3,000, and it was, the original pressing of it was 1,200 copies. And to think that, a year later it would be selling in those kind of numbers was just unfathomable to us. And it's nice. We got a gold record out of it, but totally mind-blowing and totally like never on the agenda for us. Not that we rejected it, but in some ways we did sort of reject it. We definitely walked away from the sort of the smart way of trying to follow up on that success. But, the folly of youth. Nice perk, though.
That's right. Not too shabby.
Now, this is something I'm just completely curious about. Now, have people ever called you Harvey Danger like it's your name?
I can't even, there isn't a number high enough to communicate how many times that has happened to me. It doesn't happen anymore, which I'm grateful for. I never loved the band name, but it was already the band name when I joined. So, but yeah, that happened every day for years. And
I would be so annoyed.
it was intensely annoying. And then it was sort of like, it wasn't even annoying anymore. It was just sort of, it was like breathing.
Right.
And because there's only so many ways that people had of kind of interacting, and either it was, they would be, they would be respectful or disrespectful or chummy or mean or what, like there's a bunch of different modes, but like you hear the same stuff every day and it's fine. It's totally fine. Back then I wasn't as sort of comfortable being myself yet. And so it was a little bit more like, God, my name, that's not my name or whatever, So I was more petulant, it was easier for me to access petulance than it is now. I don't really have that mode quite so much anymore, which is nice for me. But yeah, it was a thing that happened all of the time.
Now, going into what you've been up to now, I know that according to Wikipedia, you were hired as a reporter for the Stranger newspaper in Seattle. Are you still doing journalism to this day, and what keeps you busy now?
No, I worked at the Stranger. I was actually working at the Stranger before the band took off, and I went back. I mean, it was a job I returned to intermittently throughout my life because it was, I had a good relationship with the people who ran it, and I felt connected to it for some years, and then I went back for one last little tour of duty in 2014 for a couple of years, and that was, the world had changed sufficiently that doing journalism, at least in the way that I had done it previously, it just no longer felt good. The way that, just the whole sort of disposition of people to media and platforms had changed so much that it was really like shouting into a room full of people who were already shouting. And so it was sort of my love for it had definitely dimmed. And so, no, I stopped doing it. I moved to Nashville to help take care of my parents, as I said, and I kind of left that sort of writing behind, at least for now. I mean, I could go back. I've been very fortunate in my life to have a bunch of different kind of semi-careers. I did a lot of writing, but I did a lot of music, and then I also worked in film, and I've done some acting on the side, and I've just done a bunch of stuff. I have never been good at settling down into one profession, which in some ways has made my life very interesting for me. But sometimes I think I maybe should have been a little more selective and maybe specialized a bit more. But I've been really lucky to have been able to pursue essentially everything that I want that interests me. So I feel lucky about that.
I think that's a wonderful thing, having the chance to try different things. A lot of people have those opportunities, so it's good that you had them.
That's true. I feel very fortunate. And when one would sort different disciplines would sort of step up and be a little bit more demanding or a little bit more remunerative or whatever, and I would do that for a while, and then if they kind of dried up or I lost interest, I would then do one of the other things. And that's kind of I've bounced between those different pursuits really since I was 20 years old, and that's 30 years ago. And so that's I'm pretty pleased with how that has gone for the most part, and I definitely feel lucky.
You had a couple solo albums too.
Yes, indeed. Though you wouldn't necessarily know it unless you went looking. But yeah, they're out there. I really like them. I think they're good. But I think the experience of Harvey Danger working in the sort of the business such as it is made me very uncomfortable with doing the kind of promotional work that you need to do to put music out, especially now, when you really have to do it all for yourself. I never quite got used to the thing of self-promotion. I never got used to the thing of telling people to go and listen to my music, or even that it existed. And so I've been, I'm a bad representative of my own work, but it's because for me, it's a thing that I do because I love doing it, and not because I'm that eager for everyone to know about it. And there's still something I just sort of, the world has changed a lot. And when we started doing music, that was considered sort of gauche to be that way, even though people still did it. But now it just seems like everybody who makes a YouTube video is very happy to tell everyone in the world that they need to, whatever,
subscribe.
Click and subscribe, which is like, I get why that is.
Yes.
I just never, like, I'm very much a kind of 90s Rip Van Winkle figure in that way. Yeah. I've never been comfortable doing it. And some of that is personal confidence. Some of it is aesthetic choice. But
either way is totally
also
okay. Either way, if you're comfortable with it and it works for you, then that's fine. But I see where you're coming from on that.
But it's also why I live in a rental house instead of owning my own. But that's fine too. It's when you make art of any kind because you love doing it, and really that's the main reason. There's always a hope that people will hear it and like it, but that's enough to me, to have the hope for it, and not to be too overly concerned with the pursuit to make them hear it and know about it, and certainly the idea that because you make art, that somehow that needs to be the way you make a living. It's great, and it has always constituted at least part of my living, but like it's not the reason that I do it. And I think there's a weird emphasis on it in the culture. I've always kind of felt that way. It's obviously a luxury when you get to have that, and show business certainly tends to be a situation where you either get paid nothing or you get massively over rewarded. There's what used to be thought of as like the middle class of being a working musician, that has really dwindled for a variety of reasons that we could get into on another podcast maybe. But it's like I have no problem with anybody doing it. It's weird to me that somehow that became a thing that people felt entitled to because they wrote songs and recorded them.
Yeah, no, you're right. That is a whole other show.
Yes, it's a lonely perspective, but it is my perspective.
And I'm sure there's several people who feel the same way. So you're not alone.
There must be. I don't know where they are, but there must be.
Now, I'd like to always wrap things up by asking the artist, what food, fashion trend, clothing item, toy, any of those types of things would make you nostalgic for the 90s?
Oh, wow. I don't think there's I wouldn't say a food thing. I mean, really, it's just, it's tricky because I still listen to that music fairly regularly. I never really stopped. It's not that I don't listen to music that has been made subsequently. It's just, I guess, that when music kind of plays the role of comfort food or something, I turn to the records that I got the most connected to when I was the most available to music generally. And so in that sense, the other day I listened to the Sebadoh album Bake Sale, which I had not listened to for a few years. And I was just 23 years old again, 21 years old actually was when it came out. And like, it was an incredibly central thing in my life. I revered that album. It felt like it had been made just for me. And so to that extent, the music of that time is just, it's not only something I enjoy listening to for nostalgic reasons, but like, it's kind of the cornerstone of my sense of who I am. And that never really changes as much as I have also broadened my horizons musically, maybe to some extent. but yeah, I guess that's the thing. And maybe also the thing where there was a certain amount of I guess when I think of the 90s, I think of a time when it was kind of considered okay to kind of opt out of a lot of cultural things, that there was a kind of real sense of refusal to participate. And that's something that I found kind of invigorating. That, that I think it was to some extent exemplified by the REM lyric that was also a Richard Linklater quote that was, withdrawal and disgust is not the same as apathy. That there's a way in which not participating in discussions wasn't a sign that you didn't care. It was a sign that you just were contemptuous of the way those discussions were being had. And I find that that idea has not diminished in me in the least. The way people talk about things today is horrible. It's so much of the time that I just don't want it to be anywhere near it. And yet there is this sense that if you withdraw entirely, that you not only are not participating, but that you kind of become invisible. And I guess maybe I've become a little more comfortable with being invisible as I get older.
That being said, too, with the fact that people are keyboard warriors now, you get a lot of people arguing for the sake of arguing.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that a lot of people, the thing that social media has done maybe more than anything is that it's made it so that I think a lot of people, I mean, obviously it has allowed a lot of people who didn't have a way of making their voice heard. They now have a way, and that's good. That's like essentially, that's essential, and it's really important, and all of that is true. However, it's also made a lot of other people, I think it's just made it so that people have opinions about things because they feel like they are required to, and they have opinions about things that they wouldn't necessarily have ever had an opinion about. But now they not only feel they have to have one, they feel they have to have one so that they can publish it. And that's the problem. I think as much as I am in favor of the democratization of culture, I also think that it has had weird ramifications on the way people think about art and language, and all expression has been cheapened in a way. And that, bums me out because I care about those things more than I care about most things. But
I think people need to know that it's okay to not say anything at all.
Yeah, you don't have to post. You don't have to say a word. It doesn't mean you don't care. Sometimes it means you do care.
Yeah.
But, I'm not in charge, so people get to do whatever they want, and that's just fine.
Thank you so much for all the time you spent today with me, Sean. I hope you had fun.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And I know it's a Canadian show. That's right. One of the things that I was really, that one of the memories of being in Harvey Danger that has been especially durable is that we spent a lot of time touring in Canada.
Coast to coast.
Coast to coast. I mean, I don't know if we never made it to Winnipeg, I think, but we did a lot of touring across Ontario. Certainly, we played in Montreal a bunch. We did, and Vancouver was just up the road, and so
true.
We did a lot, and we played with a lot of cool Canadian bands that I really loved. And also, the song Flagpole Sitter was massively inspired by Eric's trip. And so there's a certain, I wouldn't go so far as to nominate myself for honorary citizenship, but it was something that it was one of the kind of cool, weird things about being as visible as we were at that time, is that we got to, Canadian touring, less exotic certainly than, I don't know, touring in Asia or something, but it was really fun and cool, and something that has stayed close to my heart. So that was one of the big, I was excited that this opportunity arose, because I recently saw some of the footage from when we did in studio stuff at Much Music, and it was cool. It was really those were good memories.
I'm so glad that you felt that way about your Canadian experiences. I'm out west too. Like I'm in Edmonton, so
Okay.
15-hour drive from Seattle. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it. But that it takes a very strong person or group of people to tour across this country in a van or a bus because of the sheer size of it. But when you get to your destinations, it's totally worth it.
Yeah. I mean, some of the most enjoyable evenings of my life were spent in Hamilton.
Yeah.
The Hammer. And you know, I don't actually, we weren't especially in charge of the decision making about our touring, but I think it was just they were following the interest. And I don't know, playing for Canadian audiences was a joy, and playing with the bands was a joy. It was just really, those were good times.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. They'll have to maybe...
I wanted to make sure to get that out because it was really meaningful.
I'm definitely including that.
Oh, good.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you, Sean. Thank you for spending the time with me for Dope Nostalgia Podcast. And Sean has some awesome solo work out there that I'd love for you guys to hear. I'll drop some links in the social media. 2 albums available on Spotify. Nelson Sings Nielsen from 2019 and Make Good Choices from 2013. Check them out. Stream them on all your streaming services.
Social media, yeah, we've got it. Send us an email, dopenostalgiapodcast@gmail.com. Twitter, Nostalgia Dope. Or on Insta, dope_nostalgia.
This podcast is licensed by SOCAN because we believe that artists should be paid for their work.